The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Mabel Zaroff clutched her tattered satchel, watching the train that had betrayed her disappear into the distance, its whistle a mournful cry echoing across the vast Nevada desert. The platform at Pahrump station was empty save for a station master who wouldn't meet her eyes, and the cruel reality of her situation settled upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The year was 1878, and she was utterly alone. Mabel brushed the dust from her once fine blue dress, now soiled from the journey and damp with tears. She had boarded that train in St. Louis with a husband, a trunk full of possessions, and dreams of a new life in California. Now Frederick was gone vanished during a stop in Denver with their money, their tickets, and everything they owned, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bag containing only a hairbrush, a handkerchief, and a locket from her mother. The station master finally approached, his weathered face creased with reluctant sympathy. "Madam, we're closing up. You can't stay here for the night." "Please, sir," Mabel said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I have nowhere to go. My husband," the words caught in her throat. "Not my concern, madam," he replied, though his eyes softened slightly. "Town's just down that road. Might find work at the Silver Dollar Saloon. They're always looking for girls who can serve drinks." Mabel bristled. At 24, she'd been raised properly in Boston before her marriage to Frederick. The thought of working in a saloon made her stomach turn, but as night approached and the desert air cooled rapidly, her options dwindled to none. With legs trembling from exhaustion, she began the walk into Pahrump. The Nevada town was little more than a dusty main street flanked by wooden structures, a general store, a hotel that had seen better days, a blacksmith, and at the far end, the Silver Dollar Saloon, its windows glowing with yellow lamplight. The sound of raucous laughter and piano music spilled out into the street. Mabel hesitated at the swinging doors, clutching her satchel tighter against her chest. Just as she gathered the courage to enter, the doors burst open and two men stumbled out, nearly knocking her over. "Watch it." One of them slurred, grabbing her arm to steady himself more than her. "Let go of me." Mabel pulled away, losing her balance on the uneven boardwalk. She would have fallen if not for the strong hands that suddenly caught her from behind. "That's no way to treat a lady, Silas," a deep voice said over her shoulder. The drunken men muttered apologies and staggered away. Mabel turned to thank her rescuer and found herself looking up into the face of a tall man with eyes the color of a summer storm. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather vest, and a dusty cowboy hat sat atop sandy brown hair. A thin scar traced its way across his left cheekbone, and several days' worth of stubble covered his jaw. "You all right, madam?" he asked, releasing her once she was steady. "Yes, thank you," Mabel replied, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm just looking for work." The cowboy's gaze traveled over her once fine dress and the small satchel before returning to her face. "In there," he nodded toward the saloon. "That's no place for a woman like you." "I don't have many options at the moment," Mabel said, lifting her chin with the last shred of dignity she could muster. The man seemed to consider her words. "Name's Finn Grayson," he finally said, extending a calloused hand. "I run the Circle G ranch just outside of town." "Mabel Zaroff," she replied, briefly touching his hand. "You just get off the train." When she nodded, he continued. "And your husband is gone," she said simply, not wanting to expose the full extent of her humiliation to a stranger. Finn Grayson studied her for a long moment. "I need someone to cook and clean at the ranch," he said at last. "Got 3 ranch hands who eat like wolves, and I'm tired of my own cooking. Pays fair, and you'd have your own room in the main house." Mabel stared at him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer. Finding none in his steady gaze, she asked, "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know you're in trouble, and I know you don't belong in that saloon. That's enough for now." He gestured to a wagon parked further down the street. "I'm heading back tonight. You're welcome to come along or try your luck in town." The decision took only moments. Between the uncertain dangers of the saloon and the directness of this cowboy's offer, Mabel chose the latter. "I accept your offer, Mr. Grayson." Finn nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "Let's go then, Mrs. Zaroff. It's a fair ride to the ranch." He helped her into the wagon, his touch respectful but firm. As they pulled away from Pahrump, the lights of the town receding behind them, Mabel felt a curious mixture of fear and relief. She was placing her trust in a complete stranger, but somehow, sitting beside the quiet cowboy as he guided the horses through the darkening desert, she felt safer than she had in months. The Circle G ranch came into view after an hour's ride, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn and several smaller outbuildings. Lanterns glowed from windows, casting warm rectangles of light onto the packed earth of the yard. "Home sweet home," Finn said, pulling the wagon to a stop. 3 dogs came bounding out to greet them, followed by a lanky young man in suspenders. "Boss, was beginning to think you decided to stay in town tonight," the young man called out. "Had some business to attend to, Danny," Finn replied, jumping down from the wagon. He came around to help Mabel down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. "This is Mrs. Zaroff. She'll be handling the cooking and housekeeping from now on." Danny's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he touched the brim of his hat politely. "Madam," he said, "I'm Daniel Hawkins, foreman of this outfit." "Pleased to meet you," Mabel replied, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look after her journey. Finn led her into the house, which was surprisingly spacious but bore all the hallmarks of a place inhabited solely by men's sparse furnishings, discarded boots by the door, and a general air of neglect. The main room served as both dining area and parlor, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. A corridor led off to what she presumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Finn said, watching her take in her surroundings, "but it's clean and it's safe." "It's perfect," Mabel replied honestly. Compared to the prospect of the Silver Dollar Saloon, this house was a palace. Finn showed her to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl. A window looked out over the ranch yard and, beyond that, to the vast expanse of desert and mountains. "This will be your room," he said. "Mine's at the other end of the hall. The boys sleep in the bunkhouse out back." He pointed to a door across the corridor. "There's the washroom. There's a tub if you want to clean up." Mabel couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper bath. "That would be wonderful," Finn nodded. "I'll fetch water. There are some clothes in that chest belonged to my sister when she used to visit. She was about your size, I reckon." Before Mabel could thank him, he was gone, returning shortly with buckets of heated water that he poured into a large copper tub in the washroom. He left her with a bar of soap and a clean towel, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Alone at last, Mabel sank into the hot water and allowed herself to cry, not from despair this time, but from sheer relief. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight she was safe, and that was enough. The next morning, Mabel rose with the sun. She had slept better than expected in the narrow bed, exhaustion overcoming her fears and uncertainties. She dressed in one of the simple calico dresses she'd found in the chest. It fit well enough, though it was a bit short at the ankles, and ventured out to the main room. Finn was already there, stoking the fire in the cook stove. He straightened when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot. Thought I'd let you rest, but the boys will be in soon for breakfast. They work up quite an appetite." "I'll start right away," Mabel said, grateful for something to do. She found the kitchen well stocked but poorly organized. Flour, sugar, coffee, and beans were plentiful, as were eggs from the chicken coop she could see through the window. By the time the ranch hands filed in, stamping dust from their boots, Mabel had managed to produce a breakfast of flapjacks, eggs, and bacon that had the men eyeing her with newfound respect. "Madam," said a weather-beaten man with a handlebar mustache, "if you cook like this every day, I reckon the boss won't ever let you leave." "This is Joe Wilson," Finn introduced, "and that's Tommy Reeves." He nodded toward a younger man with freckles scattered across his sunburned face. "Pleasure to meet you all," Mabel said, watching with satisfaction as the men devoured the food. Over the next few days, Mabel settled into a routine at the Circle G. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning and organizing the house, cooked a hearty midday meal when the men returned from the morning's work, and then prepared supper in the evening. In between, she took inventory of the pantry, mended clothes, and gradually transformed the bachelor ranch house into something resembling a home. Finn was often gone during the day, riding out with the men to check on cattle, mend fences, or attend to the myriad tasks required to keep the ranch running. But in the evenings, after the other men had retired to the bunkhouse, he would sometimes sit at the kitchen table while Mabel finished cleaning up, telling her about the ranch and the surrounding area. She learned that he had come to Nevada 15 years earlier as a young man of 20, working first as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own land. The Circle G was modest by some standards, but it was thriving under his careful management. His sister, whose clothes Mabel now wore, lived in San Francisco with her husband and visited rarely. Mabel shared little of her own story at first, but one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the words began to flow. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a professor who had died when she was 16, leaving her and her mother in reduced circumstances. She spoke of meeting Frederick Zaroff, a charming businessman who had swept her off her feet with promises of adventure and prosperity in the West. Her mother's death had left her with no ties to Boston, and she had agreed to marry Frederick and accompany him to California, where he claimed to have business prospects. "He abandoned you," Finn said quietly when she faltered in her tale. Mabel nodded, tears threatening. "In Denver. I woke up in our hotel room and he was gone. So was our money, our tickets, everything except what I had in my small bag." She took a shuddering breath. "I reported it to the authorities, but they seemed to think I was just a hysterical woman whose husband had stepped out. By the time they took me seriously, the trail was cold. How did you get to Pahrump? I had just enough money for a ticket to the next major stop. I thought perhaps I could find work there and save enough to continue to California, where I have a distant cousin." She smiled wryly. "I never imagined that major stop would be Pahrump." Finn's jaw tightened. "If I ever meet this Frederick Zaroff, he'll answer to me." The fierceness in his voice startled Mabel, but it also warmed something inside her that had been cold since Denver. As weeks turned into a month, Mabel found herself watching for Finn's return each day, taking pleasure in his quiet approval of the changes she had made to the house. She had found fabric in town and sewn curtains for the windows, rearranged the furniture to create a more welcoming sitting area, and added small touches: wildflowers in a jar, books arranged neatly on a shelf that made the ranch house feel like a home. Finn, for his part, seemed to linger longer at the table after meals, finding excuses to be near her. He brought her small gifts from his trips to town, a ribbon for her hair, a book he thought she might enjoy, once even a small pot of honey from a traveling peddler. Each gesture was offered with a gruff nonchalance that couldn't quite disguise the intentionality behind it. One evening in late summer, a thunderstorm rolled across the desert, bringing with it a deluge of rain that transformed the dusty landscape into streams and rivulets. Mabel stood at the window, watching the lightning illuminate the mountains in brief, brilliant flashes. "Never seen a desert storm before?" Finn asked, coming to stand beside her. "Not like this," she admitted. "It's beautiful and terrifying all at once." A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and Finn's hand came to rest reassuringly on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch spread through her, and when she turned to thank him, she found his face much closer than she had expected. For a long moment they stood there, the air between them charged with more than just the storm outside. Then Finn stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should check on the horses," he said, reaching for his hat and slicker. "They get spooked by storms like this." After he left, Mabel pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, confused by the intensity of her reaction. She was still legally married, she reminded herself, though she doubted she would ever see Frederick again. And Finn was her employer. The propriety she had been raised with warned against such feelings. But as the storm raged outside, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be held in those strong arms, to be the focus of that intense gaze in a different context. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the desert air washed clean by the storm. Finn was subdued at breakfast, and shortly after he announced that he needed to ride to the north pasture to check for any damage from the storm. "I'll be gone overnight," he told Mabel. "The line shack up there is stocked with supplies." She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Be safe," she said as he mounted his horse. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that had become familiar and dear. "Always am." The day stretched long without him. Mabel busied herself with baking bread, scrubbing floors, and mending shirts, but her thoughts kept returning to the moment by the window during the storm. Had she imagined the look in his eyes, the tension in the air? That evening, as she sat on the porch darning socks, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Expecting it to be Joe or Tommy returning from town, she was surprised to see 3 unfamiliar riders approaching the ranch house. Instinctively, she stood and backed toward the door, her hand reaching for the latch. The men pulled up in the yard, their eyes taking in the quiet ranch and then fixing on her with predatory interest. "Well, what have we here?" the lead rider said, dismounting with a fluid grace that didn't match his rough appearance. "Didn't know Grayson had himself a woman." "Mr. Grayson isn't here," Mabel said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but his men will be back any minute." The man laughed, a sound that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "No, they won't. We passed them on the road to town, looking mighty pleased with themselves. Saturday night entertainment, I reckon." He approached the porch, and Mabel could smell whiskey on his breath. "I'm Rid Blackwell. Me and Finn go way back." "Mr. Grayson never mentioned you," Mabel said, her hand now firmly on the door latch. Reed's smile faltered. "No, I don't suppose he would. We had a disagreement some years back." His eyes narrowed. "You his wife?" "I'm the housekeeper," Mabel replied, unwilling to explain her complicated situation to this man who made her skin crawl. "Housekeeper, huh?" Reed exchanged looks with his companions, who had dismounted and were now lounging against their horses, watching the exchange with amusement. "Well, how about you keep house for us tonight? We're mighty hungry." Mabel knew she had little choice. The men were between her and the bunkhouse, and even if Danny, Joe, and Tommy were there instead of in town, She wasn't sure she could reach them before these men caught her. "There's food in the kitchen," she said, opening the door and backing into the house. The men followed, bringing with them the smells of dust, horses, and stale sweat. Reed removed his hat, revealing lank black hair, and made a mocking bow. "Much obliged, madam," while Mabel heated up the stew she had made for her own dinner, adding more potatoes and vegetables to stretch it for the unwelcome guests. Reed explored the main room, picking up objects and commenting on the changes since he'd last been there. "Finn's done well for himself," he said, running a finger along a shelf that Mabel had polished to a shine. "This place used to be a real dump." "It's a fine ranch," Mabel replied neutrally, setting bowls on the table. The men ate ravenously, complimenting the food between crude jokes and increasingly pointed questions about her relationship with Finn. Mabel answered as vaguely as possible, looking for any opportunity to escape to her room or, better yet, to flee the house entirely. When Reed produced a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag and suggested they make a night of it, Mabel knew she had to act. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I need to fetch more wood for the fire," she said, moving toward the door. Reed's hand shot out, grasping her wrist. "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. We'll keep you warm." The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone in place. "Take your hand off her," Finn's voice came from the doorway, cold and hard as steel. "Now." Reed's grip loosened and Mabel pulled free, backing away from the table. Finn stood in the doorway, rifle aimed steadily at Reed's chest. His clothes were splattered with mud, and his face was tight with fury. "Finn," Reed said, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Just paying a social call. Didn't expect to find you'd replaced Olivia so quickly." At the mention of the name, Finn's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't you dare speak her name. Get out of my house." Reed stood slowly, signaling his men to do the same. "We were just leaving anyway. Food wasn't that good." He reached for his hat, his movements deliberately casual. "But I'll be seeing you again, Finn. Count on it." "Not if I see you first," Finn replied, stepping aside to let the men pass but keeping the rifle trained on Reed until all three had mounted and ridden away. As soon as they were out of sight, Finn closed and barred the door, then turned to Mabel. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her wrist ached where Reed had grabbed her. "I thought you were staying at the line shack tonight." "Something didn't feel right," Finn said, setting the rifle aside and coming to her. "I decided to come back after all." His eyes searched her face. "I'm sorry, Mabel. I never thought Reed would show his face around here again." "Who is he?" she asked, allowing Finn to lead her to a chair. Finn's face darkened. "Reed Blackwell used to work for me years ago. He was caught stealing cattle, not just mine, but from other ranches too. When I confronted him, Finn paused, his hand unconsciously touching the scar on his cheekbone. "It got ugly. He went to prison for a spell, and I heard he'd left the territory after he got out." "And Olivia?" Mabel asked quietly, remembering Reed's taunt. Finn was silent for a long moment. "My wife," he finally said. "She died 5 years ago. Fever took her." The revelation stunned Mabel. In all their conversations, Finn had never mentioned a wife. "I'm so sorry," she said, reaching out to touch his arm. He covered her hand with his own. "It was a long time ago." His eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of pain and something warmer. "But Reed bringing her up like that, he always knew how to hit where it hurts. Will he come back?" Mabel asked, suddenly fearful. "Not if he knows what's good for him," Finn replied grimly. "But just to be safe, I'm going to have one of the boys stay at the house when I'm not here, at least for a while." That night, Mabel lay awake, replaying the day's events. The fear she had felt when Reed and his men arrived had been real, but it was overshadowed now by the revelation that Finn had been married. She tried to picture the woman who had been his wife. Was she beautiful, Gentle, strong. Had he loved her deeply? And what did it mean that he had never mentioned her? Was the wound still too raw, or had he simply put that chapter of his life firmly behind him? Morning came too soon. Mabel rose, still tired from her restless night, and found Finn already up, talking with Danny in the kitchen. They fell silent when she entered. "Morning, Mrs. Zaroff," Danny said, tipping his hat. "Boss was just filling me in on our visitors yesterday. Danny's going to stick close to the house for a few days," Finn explained, "just as a precaution." "Thank you," Mabel said, genuinely grateful for the protection. She began preparing breakfast, aware of Finn's eyes following her movements. After Danny left to begin his chores, Finn approached her at the stove. "Mabel, about yesterday. About Olivia, I should have told you." "You don't owe me explanations about your past," she said, keeping her eyes on the eggs she was scrambling. "Maybe not," he conceded. "But I want you to know. Olivia and I were married for 3 years. It was complicated. She never really took to ranch life. Always missed the comforts of town, the social life she'd had before." He paused, and Mabel risked a glance at his face, seeing the pain of old memories there. "When she got sick, it happened fast. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done." "I'm truly sorry," Mabel said softly. Finn nodded, accepting her sympathy. "After she died, I threw myself into the ranch. Didn't much care about making the house nice or cooking proper meals. Just existed, I guess." His eyes met hers. "Until you came along." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Mabel felt her heart quicken. Finn, the sound of horses approaching interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Finn moved quickly to the window, tension visible in every line of his body. "It's just Joe and Tommy," he said with relief, watching the 2 ranch hands ride into the yard. "They must have decided to come back early from town." The moment was broken, but throughout the day, Mabel found Finn's words echoing in her mind. "Until you came along." What did he mean by that? That she had made the house comfortable again? Or something more? Over the next few days, an unspoken tension simmered between them. Finn was attentive, almost protective, rarely letting Mabel out of his sight when he was at the ranch. He assigned one of the men to stay near the house when he had to ride out, despite no further sign of Reed Blackwell or his companions. Mabel, for her part, found herself hyper-aware of Finn's presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin when he passed close to her, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. A week after Reed's visit, Finn announced at breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. "I'd like you to come with me, Mabel," he said. "It's not safe to leave you here, even with the boys keeping watch." Mabel agreed readily, eager for a change of scenery and the chance to purchase a few items she needed. They set out after the morning chores were done, Mabel wearing one of the dresses she had altered to fit her better and a bonnet to shield her face from the sun. Pahrump looked different in daylight than it had the night Finn had found her. The dusty main street was bustling with activity, wagons loading and unloading at the general store, women chatting outside the milliner's, a blacksmith hammering at his forge. Finn helped Mabel down from the wagon with careful hands and offered his arm as they walked toward the general store. The gesture was gentlemanly, but it also served to announce to anyone watching that she was under his protection. "Mr. Grayson," the storekeeper called out as they entered. "Been a while since we've seen you in town." His curious gaze shifted to Mabel. "Mr. Porter, this is Mrs. Zaroff, my housekeeper," Finn introduced her. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Porter said, his eyes still curious. "What can I help you folks with today?" While Finn ordered supplies for the ranch, flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and various tools, Mabel browsed the shelves. making a mental list of items they needed and a few small luxuries she longed for. A bolt of blue fabric caught her eye, and she ran her fingers over it, imagining a new dress to replace the borrowed one she had been wearing. "That would suit you," Finn said, appearing at her side. "Matches your eyes." Mabel blushed at the unexpected compliment. "It's lovely but unnecessary." "Add 3 yards of the blue fabric to my order, Mr. Porter," Finn called over his shoulder, ignoring Mabel's protest. After arranging for their purchases to be loaded into the wagon, Finn suggested they get lunch at the hotel dining room. It was a simple establishment, but to Mabel, who hadn't dined out since Denver, it felt like a grand occasion. They were halfway through their meal when a hush fell over the dining room. Mabel looked up to see 3 men enter Reed Blackwell and his companions. Finn's hand moved to his side, where Mabel knew he wore a pistol beneath his coat. "Stay calm," he murmured to her. "Let's finish our meal and go." But Reed had already spotted them, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his face as he sauntered toward their table. "Well, if it isn't the happy couple," he drawled. "Enjoying a day in town, we were," Finn replied coldly. "Until now." Reed's smile didn't falter. "Now, is that any way to treat an old friend?" He pulled out a chair at their table and sat uninvited, signaling to his men to remain standing nearby. "I've been thinking about our little reunion at your place, Finn. Got me feeling nostalgic." "I suggest you indulge your nostalgia elsewhere," Finn said, his voice dangerously quiet. Reed leaned forward. "I heard an interesting rumor in town about a woman asking after a man named Frederick Zaroff." His gaze shifted to Mabel, who felt a chill run down her spine. "Fancy that same last name as yours, madam." Mabel's hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them in her lap to hide it. What did this woman want? Seems her husband disappeared with a fair amount of money that didn't belong to him. "She's offering a reward for information." Reed's eyes gleamed with malice. "Made me wonder if maybe Finn here is harboring a fugitive's wife." "Mrs. Zaroff is my employee and under my protection," Finn said firmly. "Her situation is none of your concern." Reed shrugged. "Maybe not. But it might concern the sheriff, or this woman who's looking for her husband's trail." Mabel felt ill. The thought that someone was looking for Frederick and, by extension, her brought back all the humiliation and betrayal she had tried to put behind her. Finn stood abruptly. "We're leaving." "Move aside, Reed." For a tense moment, Reed remained seated, his eyes locked with Finn's in silent challenge. Then, with deliberate slowness, he rose and stepped back. "Give my regards to the sheriff when he comes calling," he said with a mock salute. The ride back to the ranch was silent, both Mabel and Finn lost in their own thoughts. As soon as they arrived, Finn instructed Joe to unload the supplies and then led Mabel into the house. "Tell me everything about Frederick," he demanded once they were alone in the sitting room. "Everything you know about the money he took." Mabel sank into a chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. "I told you most of it already. He said he had business prospects in California. What I didn't know, what I found out in Denver just before he disappeared, was that the money he was traveling with came from investors in Boston, people who had trusted him to establish businesses for them in the West." She looked up at Finn, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I didn't know he was swindling them, I swear. I thought it was all legitimate." Finn's expression softened. "I believe you, Mabel, but if what Reed says is true, someone is looking for Frederick and might believe you were part of his scheme." "What do I do?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. Finn paced the room, thinking. "First, we need to find out if Reed was telling the truth or just trying to rattle us. I'll send Danny into town tomorrow to ask around discreetly." He came to stand before her, his face serious. "Whatever happens, Mabel, I won't let anyone take you away." "You have my word." his promise wrapped around her like a warm blanket, comforting despite the uncertainty ahead. "Thank you, Finn." That evening, after the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Finn joined Mabel on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered across the velvet black sky in dazzling profusion. "It's beautiful here," Mabel said, drawing her shawl closer around her shoulders. "So different from Boston or St. Louis. I never imagined I could feel at home in a place like this." "But you do?" Finn asked, his voice soft in the darkness. She turned to look at him, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from the window. "Yes, I do." Finn's hand found hers on the porch railing, his fingers warm and calloused against her skin. "I'm glad," he said simply. They stood there in companionable silence, watching the stars, until Mabel shivered slightly in the cooling air. "You should go in," Finn said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "It's getting cold." "Good night, Finn," she said, hesitating at the door. Something in his expression made her heart race, but before she could decipher it, he had turned back to gaze at the stars. "Good night, Mabel," he replied, his voice carrying a warmth that stayed with her as she prepared for bed. The next morning, Danny rode into town on Finn's instructions. He returned by midday, his young face grim with news that confirmed Reed's story. "There's a woman staying at the hotel," he reported as they gathered in the kitchen. "Name's Victoria Zaroff. She's been asking about her husband Frederick, showing a photograph around. Says he stole money from investors and disappeared 6 months ago." Mabel felt the blood drain from her face. "Victoria, you know her?" Finn asked sharply. "No, Frederick never mentioned being married before." Mabel sat heavily in a chair, her mind reeling. "He must have another wife. Or had one before me." "Did Danny see this woman?" Finn asked. Danny nodded. "Red hair, fancy clothes, doesn't look like she belongs in Pahrump." "Did she see you asking questions?" "No, sir. I was careful, like you said, just listened to gossip at the saloon." Finn dismissed Danny with thanks and then knelt beside Mabel's chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "This changes things," he said gently. "If Frederick was already married when he married you, then I'm not legally his wife," Mabel finished, the implications dawning on her. "I'm not married at all." "No," Finn agreed. "But it also means this Victoria might see you as a rival or an accomplice. Either way, it's not safe for you to stay in Pahrump." "Where would I go?" Mabel asked, the panic she had felt at the train station months ago threatening to return. Finn's grip on her hands tightened. "I've been thinking about that. I have a friend who owns a ranch near Reno. You'd be safe there until we sort this out." The thought of leaving the Circle G, leaving Finn, made Mabel's chest constrict painfully. "Is that what you want? For me to go?" "No," Finn said with a fierceness that surprised her. "It's the last thing I want, but I need to know you're safe." "I feel safe here," Mabel insisted. "With you." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained, the unspoken feelings they had both been harboring, all of it seemed to evaporate in the heat of their shared gaze. "Mabel," Finn began, his voice rough with emotion. The sound of approaching horses interrupted him yet again. This time, when Finn went to the window, his face hardened. "It's the sheriff," he said grimly, "and he's not alone." Mabel stood, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "Who's with him?" "A woman in a fine green dress. Red hair." Finn turned to her, his decision made. "Go to my room. There's a trapdoor under the rug that leads to a root cellar. Wait there until I come for you." "I can't hide forever, Finn," Mabel protested. "Not forever," he agreed. "Just until I can figure this out. Please, Mabel, trust me." The urgency in his voice convinced her. With a quick nod, she hurried down the hall to Finn's room, finding the trapdoor where he had described it. The cellar below was dark and smelled of earth and potatoes, but it was dry and had enough headroom for her to stand. She left the trapdoor slightly ajar to hear what transpired above. Finn's voice carried clearly as he greeted the visitors. "Sheriff Daniels, what brings you out to the Circle G, Mr. Grayson?" the sheriff replied. "This is Mrs. Victoria Zaroff from Boston. She's looking for her husband who may have passed through these parts." "I'm sorry to hear that," Finn said, his voice neutral. "But I don't see how I can help." "Mrs. Zaroff, perhaps you should explain," the sheriff suggested. A woman's voice, cultured and with a hint of Boston in its accent, spoke next. "My husband, Frederick, absconded with funds from our investment firm 6 months ago. I've been tracking him across the country. His last known location was Denver, but I received information that he might have continued to Nevada." "I haven't met any Frederick Zaroff," Finn said truthfully. "Information suggests he may have been traveling with a young woman," Victoria continued. "Dark hair, blue eyes, slender. She may be using the name Mabel Zaroff, claiming to be his wife." There was a pause, and Mabel could imagine Finn considering his response. "The only new arrival in Pahrump recently is my housekeeper," he finally said. "A widow named Mrs. Mabel Smith. She came on the stage from Utah about a month ago." Mabel's heart raced at the lie. Finn was protecting her. "I see," Victoria said, sounding unconvinced. "Would it be possible to meet this Mrs. Smith? Perhaps she's seen my husband in her travels." "I'm afraid not," Finn replied. "She's in town today, shopping. Won't be back until evening." "Then we'll return tomorrow," Victoria said with a finality that suggested she was used to getting her way. "As you wish," Finn agreed. "Though I doubt Mrs. Smith will be of much help. She's a quiet woman, keeps to herself." After a few more minutes of conversation, during which the sheriff asked about the general state of affairs in the area, Mabel heard the visitors depart. Still, she waited in the root cellar, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. If Victoria was truly Frederick's first wife, then her own marriage had been a sham from the start. But how could she prove that she had been an innocent victim of Frederick's deceptions? The trapdoor opened fully, and Finn's face appeared above her. "They're gone," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "But they'll be back tomorrow, expecting to meet Mrs. Smith." Once she was standing in his room, he continued, "We need to get you away from here tonight. I've been thinking my sister's place in San Francisco might be best. It's far enough away that Victoria won't easily follow." "Finn, I can't keep running," Mabel said firmly, "and I won't let you lie for me anymore. It's not right. What else would you have me do?" he demanded, frustration evident in his voice. "Hand you over to a woman who might see you as an accomplice to her husband's crimes. Or worse, a rival. I could explain everything to the sheriff," Mabel suggested. "Tell him how Frederick abandoned me, that I had no idea he was already married, or that he had stolen money." "And if he doesn't believe you?" Mabel had no answer for that. The law often sided with the person of greater social standing, and Victoria Zaroff, with her Boston connections and financial resources, would certainly be believed over a stranded young woman with nothing to her name. Finn's expression softened at her silence. "I'm not letting you face this alone, Mabel. That's not up for discussion." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingertips lingering against her cheek. "I care about you, more than I should, probably." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Mabel's heart stuttered, then raced. "Finn." Before she could say more, he stepped back, his hand falling away. "We need to pack some things for you," he said, all business again. "Just essentials. We'll leave after dark." That evening, with a small bag containing a change of clothes and a few personal items, Mabel waited in the kitchen while Finn spoke with his men. He had decided to tell them a version of the truth, that Mabel was in trouble through no fault of her own, and he was helping her reach safety. When he returned, his face was grim. "Danny will tell the sheriff and Mrs. Zaroff that you, Mrs. Smith, received word of a sick relative and had to leave suddenly. It should buy us some time." "Where are we going?" Mabel asked, having noticed that Finn was packing supplies for himself as well. "South first, to throw off any pursuit, then west toward California." He checked his pistol, then tucked it into his holster. "We'll travel by night when we can, stay off the main roads." The reality of what Finn was doing for her suddenly overwhelmed Mabel. "You're risking so much," she said, tears threatening. "Your ranch, your reputation, they don't mean anything if you're not here," Finn interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. He crossed to her in 2 strides and took her face in his hands. "Don't you understand yet, Mabel? You've become everything to me." And then he was kissing her, his lips gentle but insistent, as if he'd been holding back for months and could no longer contain his feelings. Mabel responded instinctively, her arms winding around his neck, drawing him closer. In that moment, all her worries about Frederick, Victoria, and the uncertain future melted away, replaced by the certainty of Finn's embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night I found you outside the Silver Dollar," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Mabel asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You were married, and then you were mourning the loss of that marriage, and then—" He sighed. "I suppose I was afraid. You." Afraid. The thought seemed impossible for the strong, steady man she had come to know. Afraid of caring too much, of losing someone again. His eyes, so blue in the lamplight, held hers. "But I'm more afraid now of losing you without ever having told you how I feel." "And how do you feel, Finn Grayson?" Mabel asked softly. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for you to step off that train," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Like everything before was just preparation for loving you." The words washed over her like a benediction. Healing wounds she hadn't known were still open. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. "I think I have since that first night when you offered me safety and respect when I had nothing." Finn kissed her again, more urgently this time, as if sealing their declarations. When they parted, he took her hand. "We should go," he said reluctantly. "The moon will be up soon and we need to make good distance before dawn." They slipped out the back door into the barn, where Finn had saddled 2 horses, his sturdy bay gelding and a gentle mare for Mabel. He helped her mount, then handed her the reins. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they rode out under the star-strewn sky. "If we get separated for any reason, head west and look for the North Star. I'll find you." They rode through the night, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the shadows when possible. Finn set a pace that was cautious but steady, and Mabel found herself grateful for the riding lessons he had given her over the past few months. As dawn approached, they reached a small canyon with a stream running through it, one of Finn's line camps. He explained. A simple 1-room cabin provided shelter, and the thick walls of the canyon would hide any smoke from their fire. While Finn tended to the horses, Mabel explored the cabin. It was basic: a bed, a table, a stove, but it was clean and dry. She found supplies in a trunk: canned goods, coffee, even a few books. "We'll rest here today," Finn said, entering the cabin with their saddlebags. "Travel again tonight. We can reach the California border in 3 days if we're careful." Mabel nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The emotional and physical strain of the past 24 hours weighed heavily on her. Finn noticed her fatigue. "You should sleep," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she protested. "I'll wake you in a few hours and take my turn then," he promised, guiding her to the bed. Mabel was asleep, almost as soon as her head touched the thin pillow, lulled by the sound of Finn moving quietly about the cabin and the distant murmur of the stream outside. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Finn was at the stove, his back to her, humming softly as he cooked. For a moment, Mabel simply watched him, struck by the domesticity of the scene despite their circumstances. This was what it would be like to be married to him. She realized to wake each morning to his presence, to build a life together at the Circle G. "Morning," Finn said, turning to find her awake. "Or afternoon, rather. You slept nearly 8 hours." Mabel sat up, embarrassed. "Why didn't you wake me for my watch? You needed the rest more than I did." He brought her a tin cup of coffee. "Besides, I like watching you sleep." The simple admission made her blush. She accepted the coffee, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "What's our plan now?" Finn sat beside her on the edge of the bed. "We'll ride out at dusk. There's a trading post about 20 miles south where we can get fresh supplies. After that, we'll head west toward the Sierras. I know a pass that's not widely used. And once we're in California, my sister and her husband have a house in San Francisco. You'll be safe there until we can sort out this situation with Victoria Zaroff." Mabel set down her coffee cup. "And you? Will you stay in San Francisco too?" Finn's eyes met hers, serious and intent. "I need to go back to the Circle G eventually. It's my livelihood, my home." He took her hand. "But I'm hoping, when all this is resolved, that it might become your home too, permanently." Her heart swelled at the implied proposal. "Are you asking me to marry you, Finn Grayson?" "Not very romantically, I'm afraid," he said with a rueful smile. "I'd planned to do it properly, back at the ranch. Had a ring that belonged to my mother all picked out and everything." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But yes, Mabel Zaroff, or whatever your real name turns out to be, I'm asking you to be my wife, to make the Circle G our home together." Mabel couldn't contain her joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Finn." He gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would build together. For a few blissful moments, they forgot about Victoria Zaroff, about the uncertain journey ahead, about everything except the love they had found against all odds. But reality intruded in the form of hoofbeats approaching the canyon. Finn broke their embrace, instantly alert. "Stay inside," he instructed, reaching for his rifle and moving to the window. Mabel's heart pounded as she watched him peer cautiously outside. "Who is it?" "Danny," Finn said with relief, setting the rifle aside. "And he's alone." He opened the door as Danny rode up to the cabin, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Boss," the young foreman called out, dismounting quickly. "Thank God I found you. What's happened?" Finn demanded, helping Danny tie his horse. "That woman Victoria Zaroff, she didn't believe our story about Mrs. Smith going to visit a sick relative. She got the sheriff to search the ranch," Danny explained as they entered the cabin. "Found some of Mrs. Zaroff's things, her real things, with her name on them." Mabel felt ill. In her haste to leave, she had forgotten about the few personal items she still possessed from her life before the locket from her mother with her full name engraved inside, letters she had saved. "The sheriff's forming a posse," Danny continued. "They think you've kidnapped her or worse. Reed Blackwell's been filling their ears with all sorts of tales." Finn's jaw tightened. "How did you find us?" "Guessed you'd head for one of the line camps first. Checked the north one, then came here." Danny looked between them, his young face earnest. "Boss, you need to get across the border fast. Once there in California, the Nevada posse can't touch you." "You rode all night to warn us," Mabel said, touched by the young man's loyalty. Danny nodded. "Couldn't let them catch you unawares. Joe and Tommy are running interference, leading them north first, but it won't fool them for long." Finn clasped Danny's shoulder. "I won't forget this, Danny. You're risking a lot." "The Circle G is my home too," Danny said simply. "And Mrs. Zaroff, she belongs there." He looked at Mabel with a respectful nod. "We all see it, boss, how it should be." Finn's expression softened momentarily, then returned to its determined focus. "We need to move now. Danny, can your horse make it back to the ranch? He'll need rest first, but yes. Take food and supplies, then head back once it's dark. Tell the sheriff you found signs we went south toward Arizona." Finn began packing their few belongings. "We'll go west as planned. With luck, we can cross into California by tomorrow night." Within minutes, they were ready to ride. Mabel embraced Danny briefly, thanking him again for his help, while Finn gave his foreman final instructions for managing the ranch in his absence. As they mounted, Finn reached across to squeeze Mabel's hand. "Stay close," he reminded her. "And remember what I said, if we're separated, head west and follow the North Star," she finished. "You'll find me." The terrain grew more challenging as they pushed westward, leaving the relative flatness of the Nevada desert for the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Finn set a grueling pace, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or take a brief meal. By nightfall of the second day, they had reached a steep, wooded pass that Finn said would lead them into California. The trail was narrow and treacherous in places, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses on foot. "We're making good time," Finn encouraged as they paused to catch their breath. "Once we're over this ridge, we'll be in California," Mabel nodded, too tired for words. Her legs ached from riding and walking, and her hands were blistered from gripping the reins. But she pushed on, drawing strength from Finn's steady presence beside her. They were nearing the top of the ridge when the sound of distant voices carried on the wind. Finn froze, signaling for Mabel to be still. In the moonlight, his face was taut with concentration as he listened. "Posse," he whispered. "They must have figured out our true direction." Fear clutched at Mabel's heart. "How close?" "Too close. And they'll move faster than we can with fresh horses." Finn's mind worked rapidly. "We need to split up." "No," Mabel protested. "We stay together." Finn took her face in his hands. "Listen to me. They're after both of us, but it's me they want to punish for supposedly kidnapping you. If they catch us together, we'll both face charges. But if you're alone when they find you, you can claim I forced you to come with me." "I won't lie like that," Mabel insisted. "You have to," Finn urged, "for both our sakes. Tell them I kidnapped you, that you were trying to escape when they found you. Victoria Zaroff wants her husband's money and revenge on anyone associated with him. She doesn't care about you personally." "And what about you?" Tears filled Mabel's eyes at the thought of Finn facing the posse alone. "I know these mountains. They don't." His confidence was reassuring despite the dire circumstances. "I'll lose them in the high country, then circle back to San Francisco. My sister will help us." "How will I find you?" "My sister's husband owns a shipping company, Westerly Maritime. Any letter addressed to me in care of them will reach me." He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch. "This is all the money I have on me. It should be enough to get you to San Francisco." Mabel clutched the pouch, then impulsively removed her mother's locket from around her neck. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his palm, "so you'll have something of mine with you." Finn's fingers closed around the locket and he nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'll find you, Mabel, I promise." He kissed her fiercely, then helped her onto her horse. "Ride west, straight down this trail. Don't stop until you reach a town called Greystone. There's a stage coach there that will take you to Sacramento, and from there you can catch a steamer to San Francisco." "I love you," Mabel said, memorizing his face in the moonlight. "I love you," Finn replied. "Now go." With a last desperate look, Mabel urged her horse forward, leaving Finn behind on the ridge. Her tears fell freely as she rode, but she didn't look back, knowing that if she did, her resolve would crumble. The trail descended steeply into California, and Mabel concentrated on guiding her horse safely through the darkness. Behind her, she heard shouts and the distant crack of a rifle shot. Her heart seized with fear for Finn, but she pressed on as he had instructed. By dawn, she had reached the small town of Greystone. It was little more than a way station for travelers crossing the mountains, with a single street lined by a general store, a stable, and a simple hotel that also served as the stagecoach stop. Exhausted and heartsick, Mabel dismounted at the stable and arranged to sell her horse, using part of the money Finn had given her. The stable master, a grizzled old man with kind eyes, seemed to sense her distress. "Running from something, miss?" he asked as he counted out her payment. "Just trying to reach San Francisco," Mabel replied, attempting a smile. The old man nodded, not pressing further. "Stage comes through at noon. Hotel across the way will give you a room to rest until then." Mabel thanked him and made her way to the hotel, where she rented a small room with a bed and wash basin. After washing away the dust of the trail as best she could, she collapsed onto the bed, intending only to rest briefly before the stagecoach arrived. She woke to insistent knocking at her door. Disoriented, she sat up, realizing with a start that the light through the window had changed. It was nearly noon. "Stage is here, miss," called the hotel proprietor through the door. "Leaving in 10 minutes. Mabel hastily gathered her few belongings and hurried downstairs, paying her bill and rushing out to where the stagecoach waited. She was the last passenger to board, joining an elderly couple and a traveling salesman for the journey to Sacramento. As the stage pulled away from Greystone, Mabel gazed out the window at the mountains behind them, sending a silent prayer for Finn's safety. Had he evaded the posse? Was he even now making his way towards San Francisco as planned? The journey to Sacramento was long and uncomfortable, the stage jolting over rough roads and stopping only briefly at way stations to change horses and allow passengers to stretch their legs. Mabel spoke little, lost in thoughts of Finn and worry about what awaited her in San Francisco. From Sacramento, she took a riverboat to San Francisco, arriving in the bustling port city 2 days after parting from Finn. The city was unlike anything she had ever seen, built on steep hills overlooking a magnificent bay, its streets teeming with people from every corner of the world. Sailors, merchants, ladies in fine dresses, Chinese laborers, Mexican vaqueros all moved through the city in a vibrant, chaotic dance. Following Finn's instructions, Mabel made her way to the offices of Westerly Maritime, located in a handsome brick building near the waterfront. She approached the clerk at the front desk, a young man with spectacles and an officious manner. "I'm looking for Mrs. Westerly," she said. "Mrs. Caroline Westerly. I'm a friend of her brother, Finn Grayson." The clerk's expression changed at the mention of Finn's name. "1 moment, please," he said, disappearing through a door behind the desk. Minutes later, a woman emerged, tall and elegant, with the same sandy hair and storm-gray eyes as Finn. Caroline Westerly assessed Mabel quickly, then smiled with genuine warmth. "You must be Mabel," she said, coming forward with outstretched hands. "Finn's telegram arrived yesterday. Come, let's not talk here." Telegram. Mabel's heart leapt with hope. If Finn had managed to send a telegram, he must be safe. She allowed Caroline to lead her outside to a waiting carriage, her mind whirling with questions. Once they were seated and the carriage was moving through the streets toward Nob Hill, Caroline turned to Mabel. "Finn's message was brief, but he explained enough for me to understand the situation. He said you were in danger and needed shelter, and that he would join you as soon as possible." "Then he's safe," Mabel asked eagerly. Caroline's smile was reassuring. The telegram came from a town called Auburn, about halfway between the mountains and Sacramento. He said he had evaded pursuit and would be in San Francisco within the week. Relief washed over Mabel like a physical wave, leaving her light-headed. "Thank God," she whispered. "My brother has always been resourceful," Caroline said with fond exasperation. "Though this is more adventure than even he usually courts." Her gaze turned curious. "He didn't say much about you, except that you were important to him and needed protection." "It's complicated," Mabel admitted, "but I love your brother very much, Mrs. Westerly." "Caroline, please," the other woman insisted. "And I suspected as much. Finn isn't one to risk everything for a mere acquaintance." She patted Mabel's hand. "You can tell me the whole story once we're home. My husband, Edward, is eager to meet you as well." The Westerly home was a beautiful Victorian on Nob Hill, with views of the bay and the city below. Edward Westerly, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and the confident bearing of a successful businessman, welcomed Mabel warmly. Over dinner that evening, Mabel shared her story, her marriage to Frederick, his betrayal and abandonment, her arrival in Pahrump, and Finn's kindness that had blossomed into love. She explained about Victoria Zaroff's appearance and their flight from Nevada, ending with their separation in the mountains. "So you're not legally married to this Frederick after all," Caroline mused when Mabel finished. "That simplifies things considerably." "But how do I prove it?" Mabel asked. "It's my word against Victoria's." Edward leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "My company has business connections throughout the country. I could make inquiries in Boston about this Victoria Zaroff and her investment firm. If your Frederick truly defrauded investors, there should be records. And if we can establish that you were an innocent victim rather than an accomplice, you'll be free to return to Nevada or stay in California if you prefer," Caroline added. "I want to be wherever Finn is," Mabel said simply. Caroline and Edward exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Then we'll do everything we can to make that possible," Edward promised. For the next few days, Mabel waited anxiously for word from Finn, while Edward made discreet inquiries about Victoria Zaroff. Caroline, meanwhile, took Mabel shopping for new clothes and showed her around San Francisco, trying to distract her from her worries. On the fourth day, Edward returned home early from his office, his face grave. "I've received some troubling information," he told Mabel and Caroline. "This Victoria Zaroff is indeed a widow from Boston whose husband operated an investment firm. But Frederick Zaroff was her brother-in-law, not her husband. Her husband, William Zaroff, died 2 years ago and Frederick took over the firm afterward." Mabel frowned in confusion. Then why would she claim to be Frederick's wife? Because she discovered that Frederick had been embezzling from the firm for years, even before her husband's death. When he fled with what remained of the investors' money, she decided to pursue him herself rather than involve the authorities. I suspect she feared that a public scandal would ruin what was left of the family business. "But that means," Mabel began. "Your marriage to Frederick may have been legal after all," Edward finished. "Though given his criminal activities, you would certainly have grounds for annulment or divorce." Mabel's mind raced with the implications. "What about the posse? The charges against Finn?" "I've sent telegrams to the sheriff in Pahrump explaining the situation. Once Victoria's deception is exposed, any charges against Finn should be dropped." Edward smiled reassuringly. "It may take time to sort out all the legal details, but I'm confident we can clear both your names." Relief flooded through Mabel, followed quickly by renewed anxiety about Finn. "But where is he? He should have been here by now." Caroline took her hand. "Finn knows how to take care of himself." Perhaps he's being cautious, taking a roundabout route to avoid being followed. Mabel nodded, trying to believe Caroline's words. But as another day passed with no word from Finn, her worry deepened into fear. On the morning of the 6th day, as Mabel sat at breakfast with Caroline, a servant entered with a telegram. Caroline took it, her face paling as she read its contents. "What is it?" Mabel asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Caroline looked up, her eyes troubled. "It's from Danny." Finn returned to the Circle G 3 days ago, only to find Red Blackwell and his men waiting. There was a confrontation. Finn was shot. The world seemed to tilt beneath Mabel's feet. "Is he?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "He's alive," Caroline said quickly, "but injured. Danny says he's asking for you." "I have to go to him," Mabel said, already on her feet. "Immediately." "Edward will arrange everything," Caroline assured her. "We'll travel with you. The Transcontinental Railroad can get us to Reno, and from there we'll take a stage to Pahrump." The journey back to Nevada was the longest of Mabel's life, despite the relative speed of the train compared to their escape by horseback. Every mile seemed to stretch endlessly, her thoughts constantly with Finn, imagining him wounded, perhaps dying, calling her name. Edward had sent telegrams ahead, ensuring that the legal situation was understood by the authorities in Pahrump. Victoria Zaroff's deception had been exposed, and the sheriff had withdrawn all charges against Finn, once it became clear that Mabel had left with him willingly, and that Victoria had no legal claim as Frederick's wife. When they finally arrived in Pahrump, Danny was waiting for them at the stagecoach stop with a wagon. His young face lit up at the sight of Mabel. "Mrs. Zaroff, thank God you've come. The boss has been asking for you something fierce." "How is he, Danny?" Mabel asked, her heart in her throat. "Holding his own," Danny replied, helping her into the wagon. "Doc says the bullet missed anything vital, but he lost a lot of blood. He's too stubborn to die, though, especially now that he knows you're coming." The ride to the Circle G seemed both familiar and strange to Mabel. Had it only been 2 weeks since she and Finn had fled in the night, it felt like a lifetime. As they approached the ranch house, Mabel saw Joe and Tommy standing guard on the porch, rifles at the ready. They nodded respectfully as the wagon pulled up. "We're keeping watch, madam," Joe explained, "in case Blackwell decides to come back and finish what he started." "Where is he now?" Edward asked, helping Caroline down from the wagon. "Ran after he shot the boss," Tommy said with disgust. "Sheriff's got a posse out looking for him and his men." Inside, the house was just as Mabel remembered it, though with signs of hasty care, blankets thrown over furniture, dishes stacked haphazardly in the kitchen. She barely noticed, her attention focused solely on reaching Finn. Danny led her to Finn's bedroom, where the local doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, was just finishing changing bandages. Finn lay on the bed, his face pale beneath his tan, his chest wrapped in white gauze. "Mr. Grayson," the doctor said, "your visitor is here." Finn's eyes, which had been closed, opened at once. When he saw Mabel in the doorway, a smile spread across his face despite his obvious pain. "You came back," he said, his voice weak but filled with joy. "Of course I did," Mabel replied, rushing to his side and taking his hand in hers. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The doctor excused himself, saying he would return in the morning, and Danny closed the door behind them, leaving Mabel alone with Finn. "I thought I'd lost you," Finn said, his fingers tightening around hers. "When Reed and his men jumped me at the North Pasture, all I could think was that I wouldn't see you again." "You're not getting rid of me that easily, Finn Grayson," Mabel said, trying for lightness despite the tears threatening to fall. "We have a wedding to plan, remember." Finn's smile widened. "I haven't forgotten." He reached with his free hand to the bedside table where a small wooden box sat. "I told you I had something of my mother's picked out." Mabel opened the box with trembling fingers to find a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It was hers and now it's yours," Finn said. "If you still want to marry a battered old cowboy who can't seem to stay out of trouble." "There's no one else I'd rather marry," Mabel assured him, slipping the ring onto her finger. "But you need to heal first. And we have some news that might help with that." She explained everything Edward had discovered about Victoria Zaroff and her deception, how the charges against Finn had been dropped, and how they were both free to build a life together at the Circle G. "So Frederick really was your husband," Finn mused, "though not much of one from the sound of it." "I'll seek an annulment as soon as possible," Mabel promised. "Edward says it should be straightforward given the circumstances." Finn's expression grew serious. "And if they never find Frederick?" "If you can't get that annulment, then we'll find another way," Mabel said firmly. "I won't let him keep me from happiness a second time." Finn's recovery was slow but steady. Mabel rarely left his side, resuming her duties as housekeeper of the Circle G while also serving as Finn's nurse. Caroline and Edward stayed for a week, helping to set the ranch back in order and making arrangements for the legal proceedings that would free Mabel from her marriage to Frederick. News came that Reed Blackwell and his men had been captured trying to cross into Arizona. They would face charges for the attack on Finn, as well as cattle rustling and other crimes they had committed in the area. Victoria Zaroff returned to Boston once her deception was exposed, having failed in her quest to find Frederick and recover the stolen money. Edward suggested that, with time, she might be convinced to testify against Frederick if he was ever apprehended, which would further strengthen Mabel's case for annulment. As autumn painted the desert in subtle hues of gold and russet, Finn was finally well enough to leave his bed and move about the house. His first journey was to the porch, where he sat with Mabel to watch the sunset, just as they had done so many times before. "I've been thinking," he said, his arm around her shoulders, "about our future." "What about it?" Mabel asked, leaning into his embrace. "I want to expand the ranch. Build a bigger house, one with a proper parlor for you to entertain and extra bedrooms for." He hesitated, a flush creeping up his neck. "For children when the time comes." Mabel's heart swelled with love. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." "And in the meantime," Finn continued, "I thought we might have a Christmas wedding if your annulment comes through by then." "And if it doesn't?" Mabel asked, though she was increasingly confident that it would. Edward's connections had expedited the legal proceedings considerably. Finn turned to face her fully. "Then we'll have a Christmas celebration and a New Year's wedding, or a Valentine's Day wedding. Or a summer one. I don't care when it happens, Mabel, only that it does." "It will," she promised, sealing her words with a kiss. "Nothing's going to keep us apart now." Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold nights and crystalline days. The annulment was granted in early December, the judge sympathetic to Mabel's situation, and convinced by the evidence Edward had gathered about Frederick's criminal activities and deception. 2 days before Christmas, with snow dusting the mountains in the distance, Mabel Zaroff became Mabel Grayson in a simple ceremony at the Circle G. Caroline and Edward came from San Francisco, and the ranch hands stood as witnesses, Danny serving proudly as Finn's best man. The ranch house, decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, hosted a celebration that lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more happiness than Mabel had ever thought possible. Later, alone in the bedroom that was now theirs, Finn held Mabel close, his lips brushing her forehead. "From the moment I saw you outside that saloon," he murmured, "something told me you were meant to be here. that you belonged at the Circle G. With you, Mabel added, her fingers tracing the scar on his face, the one he had received defending what was his. I belong with you, Finn Grayson. In the years that followed, the Circle G prospered under their joint care. The new house Finn had promised was built the following spring, a spacious, comfortable home with room for the family they both wanted. Their first child, a son they named William Daniel, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Catherine Caroline. Frederick Zaroff was eventually apprehended in Mexico and returned to Boston to face charges of embezzlement and fraud. The news reached the Circle G via a letter from Edward, but by then, Mabel had long since put her first husband and his betrayal behind her. What remained with her always was the memory of that moment at the Pahrump station, when the train had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back, and how Finn, with his quiet strength and unwavering love, had given her everything that truly mattered: a home, a family, and a love that grew deeper with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Finn presented Mabel with a small wooden box. Inside was her mother's locket, the one she had given him on the mountain, past the night they separated. "I've carried this with me every day," he told her, fastening it around her neck where it belonged. "A reminder of how close I came to losing you and how grateful I am every day that I didn't." Mabel covered his hand with hers, the years of ranch work having left them both with calloused palms and strong fingers. "The train may have left me with nothing," she said, echoing thoughts she had often had over the years, "but you, Finn Grayson, gave me everything." And as the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Finn kissed his wife with the same tenderness he had shown her from the beginning, when she was a stranded young woman with nothing to her name, and he was simply a cowboy with a ranch and a heart big enough to change both their lives forever.